I'm Danielle Paradis, and this is The Place That Thaws. On this episode, I'll tackle travel, weather, and travel again, driving into a snowbank and a changing landscape in the north. But first,
Thank you for calling Canadian North.
Merci d'avoir appelé Canadian North.
For service in English, press 1.
Pour le service en français, appuyez sur le 2.
Inuktitut ukallaqatikaqumaguvit naqillugu 3.
If you were calling due to a flight cancellation...
I am stuck in Resolute, along with my colleague, Trevor Wright. Originally, we had planned to leave Resolute after a few days and head to the community of Grise Fiord. But we met with a series of delays, along with all the other passengers trying to get home. The delays were due to weather. Normally, the flights are rebooked right away, but it was several hours and then a full day with no information about when the next flight was or whether or not I can be on it. This makes it difficult to reschedule interviews, as well as to figure out what to do with hotel bookings. And there's not a lot of hotel choice in these communities. Here I am talking to my producer, Mark Blackburn.
They're very vague. They say that usually they would get information from, or her supervisor would get information, I don't know from who. We were told at the airport that we would be going, that there was a flight on Sunday, and then they just said they would call ADCO to come pick us up. I tried to go to the counter and ask questions, but they were just on their phone ignoring me. So then I called today again. Same answer. They don't have a timeline for when they're going to give me information. They don't have any idea of when the flight would be on Sunday. But we know for sure Sunday is the earliest. Yeah.
This experience, which was incredibly frustrating for me, is really a normal part of living in the remote northern community of Grise Fiord, the most northern community in Canada. Like Resolute Bay, it's an area that is not a natural Inuit settlement. Another person who was stuck with me was the mayor of Grise Fiord, Mika Tigutak. We spoke at the airport.
The plane's being canceled until Sunday. Mm-hmm. So we're all going to be sitting in Resolute Bay until Sunday. And they said it's due to weather, not due to the plane. Sometimes the plane is chartered out, that's why it's not available. So we're here until Sunday.
What are you doing until Sunday now?
I am going to sew little mittens for my grandchild. I brought my sewing stuff, so in case I get stranded like this. Now it's happening, so something to do.
It looked really promising earlier.
Yeah, it was really nice until we came up here. About half hour later, the fog was coming in.
Although it's difficult to consider any single weather event is caused by climate change, locals do say that a combination of bad weather and a monopoly, Canadian North is the only game in town, that between these two factors, flight service is getting worse.
Has the weather been changing?
Yes, rapidly. We are experiencing it. Even the birds that has to go south are staying up here longer than they should. The snow came early in August. The ocean is always different now. If it's summertime, the ocean is very rough without the ice.
A few people in town told me this. In the past, icebergs in the area created a sort of calm bay near the shore, and with the breakup of multi-year ice, they're noticing rougher waters. This makes it difficult to go out hunting on either snowmobile or dog sled, and the overall decline of sea ice is a big issue.
Winter comes, there's open water that's not safe for us to travel through, because we have to travel at least 100 miles or something like that to go fishing. There's no lakes near Grise Fiord. So with the weather changing, affecting our community, we have to adjust to when we can go fishing, when we can go caribou hunting, even when we can go seal hunting. Because seal meat is our main source of country food that keeps us going. When it's rough ice or the ice is not forming as much as it used to, it's not so promising as the way it used to be. And we noticed the brightness in the northern communities is a little bit longer than when it used to go away. Like it would be pitch dark end of October. It's not the same anymore. Really? Yeah, another week or 2 weeks we can see a little bit of light. And the sunset, or the sun when it's showing in the morning, it's coming up in the where it never used to show.
Why do you think that you're seeing these changes?
Because of the climate change, because of the global warming. The north gets really affected because of the global warming. And mining, too, can be a big factor here because everywhere there's mining now. And when mining or the contaminants come up to the north and they stay in the north. We got to be careful. Myself, I drink a lot of iceberg tea. I have to boil them. I have to make sure it's safe to drink.
The chemicals that Mika is talking about here are known as persistent organic pollutants. This is something Sheila Watt-Colchier, an Inuk human rights activist and recipient of the Order of Canada, raised awareness of in the early 1990s and 2000s. But in the South, it's something that many of us don't know a lot about. POPs are the toxic remains of agricultural pesticides, garbage incineration, and manufacturing. The Inuit Circumpolar Council has worked with scientists to raise awareness of the emerging concerns. In the Arctic, the POPs accentuate in the polar regions. These forever chemicals accumulate in fatty tissue, and so their levels grow as you go up the food chain. And thanks to climate change, there are other ways these chemicals are getting into the food cycle. An article in the Journal of Environmental Science, Processes and Impacts says that the decrease in sea ice means that more light is growing more phytoplankton in the Arctic, and this can lead to higher chemical concentrations in marine life. The Stockholm Convention, an environmental agreement signed by 152 countries, tagged 12 chemicals for restriction, including some pesticides and fire retardant chemicals. Trevor and I finally get up to Grise Fjord, and I'll tell you about that trip in the next episode, but the delay meant that we had more time in Resolute Bay. So we rented a truck to drive around to get some footage of the town. I was driving, and within 5 minutes, I drove us into a snowbank.
They're locked up.
In addition to being incredibly embarrassing, making a fool out of yourself is also an amazing way to get to know people. I decided to kill some time at the post office. So that's how I met Amelia Akiatushuk. Amelia has her head shaved and wears beautiful and elaborate eye makeup.
Guess what?
What?
They gotta go get the loader.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Hey, maybe it's a good time to be a girl and be stuck.
No, you're taking us down with you. We lost a point.
I'm making all women look bad by coming to Resolute Bay and immediately driving into a snowbank.
While I passed time at the post office, Amelia and I talked.
Can I get you to say and spell your name for me?
Why?
Just because so what I'm doing is I'm recording a podcast while I'm here. And I'm talking to locals. And you're a local.
Yes.
And I found you at the post office.
Yes.
So what's your name?
Amila.
Yeah.
Ameela.
And your last name?
Aqyatusuk.
How do you say that?
Aqyatishuk.
Akatishuk?
No.
No, I'm sorry. I want to get it right.
Aqyatishuk.
Can you break it into some syllables?
Aqyatushuk.
Kia? Tushuk.
Yeah.
Akiatushuk.
Mm-hmm.
Akiatushuk.
It's a version of full.
Full?
Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm so full.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Akiatushuk.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Amila has worked at the post office on and off for 5 years. She lives just down the street. She's lived there most of her life, except for a trip to college, where she went to learn 3D arts and design. It ended up not being her thing.
Was it a big change?
Yes, it was awful. It was 35 degrees when I got there, and it was, I think, 10 when I left.
Mm-hmm.
Awful. Stupid.
Your blood's not made for that.
Yeah. Plus, it's like the humidity and people, it's like you don't know anyone. You're just going in kind of blind.
Yeah.
We talked in between her getting packages for people and me explaining to people why I was there. A few of the locals also agreed with me that the area that I had turned off into definitely looked like a road.
I got the truck stuck out there.
Oh, that's you?
That's me. It's pretty embarrassing. So I'm hiding.
No, that's okay, because it looks like a road.
Thank you. That's what I said.
Yeah.
She agrees with me. It looks like a road.
No.
Yes, because we use it.
Yeah, that doesn't make it a road.
It still looks like a road.
In my conversations, one of the things that came up over and over again was the relocation and the effect that it had on people here. But also, why the North needs to be an area of special focus while we work on adapting to climate change. After all, the people who are up here were tricked into this high Arctic life. It wasn't something they necessarily chose.
The long story long is that my parents are from the relocation era. Mm-hmm. My mom was from Somerset Island, which is an island south from here. Mm-hmm. My dad is from Grise Fjord, and they both came here for school.
I told Amila that sometimes it felt like people didn't want to talk about climate change. That it would come up and then the subject would change.
If you were doing a podcast about the North and climate change, what would you want people to know?
It's well, first of all, real. And there's real impact. Like, we were put here because of the relocation. Some people were able to go back home, but I don't know, Stockholm syndromed into liking Resolute.
And some people apparently tried to go back and they were told no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be here. But it does impact like daily life or how the world works around us. We can only adapt so fast. Mm-hmm. It's hard to see the big picture sometimes.
I was up north right before the dark season, where the sun stops coming up at all. For me, it was remarkable to see the changes day to day. For people in town, it was just normal.
I think when I got here, the sun was coming up at like 10, and now it's like an hour and a half later. That really is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like the Earth is moving really fast.
It is. It's tilting. That's why we get winter.
I know, but like, I've never seen it like this before.
Mm-hmm. There's more daylight. Like, not necessarily the sun. The sun hasn't changed its trajectory on how it is. But there's more daylight. I think that's more to do with climate change because, well, the light reflects from the atmosphere.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is different.
I've heard people say that too.
Yeah.
So it's like it's brighter than it used to be here.
Yeah.
Eventually, the front loader did come and pull us out of the snowbank. But I am still stuck thinking about how the light can be brighter than it was before. So coming up next, we'll discover exactly why that is.
Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.
Both Emila and Mika talked about the way that the atmosphere was changing in their communities. They, and others, kept using the term brighter. A stop at the dump and then the local RCMP detachment is what led me to discover what was going on. I was out at the dump with Trevor, taking pictures, when an RCMP vehicle drove by. Then, Constable Quentin Vanderschaff stopped by to talk to me. We talked for a bit about Resolute and the project I was working on. When I got back to the hotel, his commanding officer, Corporal Paul Britton, had called to see if Trevor and I would like to visit a northern detachment. We're not hard to find. Remember, there's only one hotel in town. Of course, we said yes. It was through Quentin that I learned about the existence of Alexander Fjord and a remote detachment that never really came to be. He showed me pictures of the trip he had taken with a scientist who had just dismantled a 35-year-long experiment.
So Alexander Fjord is like, it's one of the detachments that we have pictures of up here. Oh. And so it was like the theory I guess they had was that it was going to be another like Grease Fjord, just like further up. Mm-hmm. So this after we landed, this was the special constable house, so like the special constable lived there. And then this was the office, and it was like the front, like the office area was like maybe like the size of our front counter area there. Mm-hmm. Then it was like a kitchen and just 2 bedrooms in the back because it was like the constable and the corporal didn't have families. They weren't allowed to have families up there, so it was just like they just had a bedroom each.
There's a lot more grass.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, it's very nice. It's apparently like because there's been researchers that have been going there for the last like 40 years to do I don't know what kind of research, like all kind of generic stuff. But they said it's kind of like a microbiome there where they're kind of surprised that there's so much grass and stuff. This is the detachment closure letter. So like back in the day, when they close a detachment, they just like leave this letter hung up.
So in case anybody's roaming.
I guess like in case somebody came in and was like, oh my god, I need the police. Like, oh, it's closed.
No, like they cannot access it by any way other than like.
Yeah, so they had this open from 53 to 63.
I made notes, and when I got home, I tracked down the researcher. He has an interesting perspective on the Arctic, partly because he has spent decades in a place that very few people have been, Alexander Fjord. Can you introduce yourself for me?
Sure. I'm Greg Henry. I'm Professor Emeritus of Geography at the University of British Columbia.
Thank you, yeah. And you research, what should we call it? Things pertaining to the Arctic, and that's why we're talking today?
Things pertaining to the Arctic, yes. I have, my entire research career has been in the Arctic. That involves everything from global climate change effects on tundra ecosystems to the importance of tundra ecosystems to grazing animals, muskox and caribou in particular.
Can you tell me about the place you've researched, Alexander Fjord?
Well, it's the most beautiful place on the planet to start with. It is in the fjord lands of the east side of Ellesmere Island, which faces Greenland. And there are wonderful deep-sided fjords that cut into the shore of the island. There are 2 major ice caps on either side. There's Prince of Wales in the south and Agassiz ice cap in the north, and then outlet glaciers come out into those fjords, some of them dipping down and right into the ocean.
Greg had amazing stories of this breathtaking landscape, but the reason he has access to the area is also embedded in the story of the relocation. Greg stays in a community that was partly created by the Canadian government in this sad chapter of history.
We stay in an old abandoned RCMP post, and so this is part of the, I would say, awful story of Canadian history. At the time, the Dew Line site, the distant early warning site, and there was the Cold War starting up, and so there was the push to have radar sites to keep an eye on the Soviet Union, build weather stations to provide weather to bombers and to increase military operations. And of course, most of this was being funded by the United States. We were willing.
As we've talked about in previous episodes, many people were told that they could return home to northern Quebec if they didn't like the conditions up north. But then they were told, no, you can't. The government did 2 drop-offs at Resolute Bay and Grise Fjord and planned to do a third community.
They did 2 trips. The next year, this was 53, and then 54, they were supposed to bring them up again and drop them off at Alexander Fjord, which was going to be the third community. They couldn't get to Alexander Fjord because of the ice conditions, and so they just put those other people at Grise Fjord and Resolute, and then they stopped, thankfully. Part of Alexander Fjord was that the RCMP post was built to be there when the icebreaker arrived with the people and set up the new community, but they never arrived. But they had the RCMP post was still there, and the RCMP then kept it open for 10 years. They lived there. There was 2 RCMP folks. Every 2 years, they lived there for 2 years, and then they cycled out. And then after 10 years, they decided that it was, there was no threat. There was no police work going on. But what's really cool, though, is if you talk to some of the members who were at Alexander Fjord at the time, and I've talked to 2 of them. One particular, Tom Smith, became a provincial court judge in BC. He said it was the best 2 years of his life. He did not want to leave.
When the RCMP closed their office in 1963, the buildings remained, so Greg and others ended up using it as a science base. They would stay there for a 3-month period to conduct a warming experiment and see the effects on increased warmth on plants that grow in the Arctic tundra.
The warming experiments very nicely predicted exactly what did happen and is continuing to happen for tundra systems. These are cold systems, so if you add heat, you're relieving one of the limitations of that system. And so you warm them up, the plants grow bigger and faster.
But over the years, they also started to notice warming changes in the control beds that they had made, the ones that didn't get extra heat in the experiment. Did you notice other changes while you were there?
Yeah, the sea ice. When we first got there, there was multi-year icebergs all through the summer. And what was really fun about that was that the walrus would get up on top of those. You'd have 30, 40 walrus going back and forth on these ice flows that would move with the tidal currents, and you'd hear the barking at each other. Now it's dead silent. There's no ice. And some years it looks like a lake. And that's the prediction, is that eventually all the summer ice, or virtually all the summer ice, will disappear from the Arctic Ocean. And that will probably put us into a different climate regime, because that big mirror of ice is going to be gone.
I also asked Greg about the sunlight and the fact that people kept telling me that the light seemed brighter than before. To my surprise, there was an answer.
No, not really. The polar amplification is the reason why the warming will be greatest in the high latitudes. One of the major factors is the loss of snow and ice earlier and arriving later. And so there's a longer period there where there's no snow. And so the reflection of the sunlight, there's not as much reflection. So most of the sunlight is actually absorbed by the dark water and the dark tundra surfaces, especially if it's got plants on it. The plants are usually darker than the soil. So that, with the loss of snow, means that that's been amplified. That's a positive feedback that leads to more warming. So the warming leads to more warming. That's amplified in the Arctic. There's a few more atmospheric things that do go on that also add to that. The inversion is a classic effect in the wintertime, not only in the Arctic, but anywhere that you have cold. So that's with cold air near the surface, because it gets cooler in the surface in the wintertime, and then warm air across the top. And so that's common in the mountains. So Jasper and the mountains of BC in the wintertime, cold air sinks into the valleys, and then you climb up out of the valleys, and it's a lot warmer out of there. It's the same thing in the Arctic.
Greg told me that it was stunning how quickly the changes have happened in the 35 years that he has been monitoring the Arctic. The changes included drastic changes to the shoreline, but also issues with the weather that made flight difficult.
This year was the snowiest year I have ever seen. We had over 1.5 meters of snow. We usually have at the most 50 centimeters of snow everywhere. It was remarkable. It was so much snow that we had to wait for 10 days for the second flight to come in to get the snow off the airstrip. The airstrip usually is free by June 15th or 20th or something like that. And this year it was July 12th before planes were able to land on it. It was really remarkable. And so that extreme variability in year to year is also part of the prediction from global warming. And we are seeing it. We had in 2018, we had one of the coldest years on record, which is seemingly odd, right, for global warming. But that's exactly what would be predicted, is that you'll have these swing years where you have very cold temperatures. And then the next year, which is what we had warmer temperatures than normal. And then this past year, we had this enormous snowfall. So those extreme events are another effect of global change.
And just in case you're wondering, yes, Trevor and I made it up to Grise Fjord to an abbreviated stay. That's coming up on the next episode. The Place That Thaws was written and recorded by me, Danielle Paradis, edited by Jesse Andrushko, produced by Mark Blackburn. You can find this and other APTN podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcast app you currently use. The title music is by Angela Amarulik. Her song is about the springtime. You can find her music on all major streaming platforms. All the sources for the show can be found in our show notes. You can email me, dparadis, Paradis, @aptn.ca. If you like this podcast, please consider donating to support Indigenous news. Go to aptnnews.ca/contribute. This podcast was recorded in the Edmonton Public Library.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News. Homeless, houseless, shelterless people, they aren't hard to find in Winnipeg. They're on the sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they? Hear their stories in my new 5-part podcast called Our Relatives. Listen on your favorite player.